today's topic was pretty much influenced by my experiences in the Brussels bubble, which is extremely Western Europe focused. So I spent a lot of time with politicians there who are very willing to listen to Italian, Spanish, German, French opinions. But often the Polish, the Baltic, the Romanian, Bulgarian perspective is completely missing. And given the geopolitical situation, given the increased economic influence of Central and Eastern Europe, I think this discussion couldn't be timelier in the great city of Łódź. And I hope this discussion will continue in Brussels and other Western European countries, given the increasing influence of Central and Eastern Europe. And for this discussion, we're going to have a great panel of four people from three Central Eastern European countries. First of all, a very warm welcome to Marcin Święcicki, who's a Polish politician and an economist. You have been a former deputy minister for the economy, a former minister for foreign relations as well, and obviously the former mayor of Warsaw. So first-hand experience with a lot of the economic development that Poland went through. Also very delighted to have Professor Christian Năsulea on the panel, who is teaching economics and management at the University of Bucharest. And he's also the executive director of IES-Europe, which has been around since the 1989 and running a lot of great free market programs both in France and in Romania. Very happy to have Zofia Kościk with us also, who's a junior policy analyst at the Civic Development Forum, particularly focusing on public finances and business regulation. And last but not least, Latchezar Bogdanov, who is the chief economist of the Institute for Market Economy, which is the oldest think tank, actually, oldest free market think tank in Bulgaria. And he's very much focusing on tax policy and public expenditure. So you can see that it's kind of an economics-heavy panel. So I would like to start with an economic question. First with Marcin. Given your role as previous mayor of Warsaw and kind of seeing the trajectory of Poland, the fantastic economic improvements over the years, I would like to know a little bit about the kind of growth potential and the reasons for the immense economic growth that Poland went through over the last 2 decades, and how you see that will influence the role of Poland within the European Union.
Dziękuję. Thank you very much for this question, but I will speak in Polish if you allow, since I think that most of the people are from Poland here. So the Polski success.
Well, the Polish success, we owe the success of Poland to the so-called Balcerowicz plan, the shock therapy, which immediately introduced free market conditions, which made, as a result of which our economy had to adjust to the global markets, to the market economy. It was quite a costly therapy. It brought about a rather high unemployment rate, but it immediately put us on the right track. And thanks to the entrepreneurship of our compatriots and the economic freedom, the Polish economy grew very fast, and the EU accession was additional factor that accelerated this growth, because we got access to a very big common market. Well, our turnover with EU accounts for around 80% of our trade. Well, our trade increased 5 times. We export our food surpluses to the EU, but also unemployment that we had in Poland still at the beginning of this century, in a way got exported, because people were leaving Poland for other countries. Well, so the question, I understand, also relates to the future. Well, what's important for Poland is to finish certain aspects such as privatization. Our economy is still over-regulated, but I think it's true of all the EU. We are not catching up with the Far East or United States when it comes to the digital market, the top-notch services that should be changed. And of course, if Ukraine joins the EU, this will be very beneficial for Poland. Well, there will be problems related to that, but I think that the overall outcome will be positive if it is well prepared. Well, speaking also about the economy, our future is linked with the EU, and one more thing that about the European Union is the free trade agreement between the EU and the United States, the so-called TTIP, which was stopped by Trump. These negotiations were not taken up by the Biden administration, but that would create the biggest economic bloc in the world, which could dictate in a way the rules, and that I think would be beneficial for both parties.
It may happen, maybe not with the Trump administration, but I guess we will see after November. So, Zofia, I would like to turn to you a little. Marcin already touched on the issue of, okay, what can be done further when it comes to economic liberalization. In your view, if we want Poland to become one of the key EU leaders, obviously it requires both political and economic power. How can Polish decision makers today help the country to reach that sort of economic power? What are the kind of missing liberalizing reforms that would make Poland more prosperous for the next 10 years?
I would maybe more like to talk about things that we still not maybe struggle, but are not so present in CE region, which is VCs and PE funding, which I mean startups and innovations. We have history with unicorns. We have history with some VC funding and private equity coming in to invest in innovation. But the problem still lies in capital that is going to CE region and the kind of innovation that we try to build, but it's huge in case of like what was maybe 30 years ago. But when we look on the Western Europe and we see that there's like 4 to 8 times higher capital going from VC and PE funding, we still see that, okay, there is something that we can work on. So I think maybe the regulations or maybe on the point of funds and investments in CE region. But I think maybe the point that we can talk more about is higher education. We have really good programs that are in CE. I'm talking about MEME, which is Master in Management, like Polish universities involved, Czech Republic universities involved, but we still struggle to put more research at our university in comparison, for example, with US. Because when I met my friends in US, they usually put like in a very good universities, but like in the middle of nowhere. So there's nothing to do. But because there's nothing to do in case of like business, in the early area of their university, they have more opportunities to join as a research assistant, as a professor assistant. This is something that I don't want to say it's not existing. It is existing, but it's much, much harder to join research cohort in especially Polish university. So maybe more structured approach to get students involved even at bachelor level or master before they will come to PhD, because I think it's very good we cooperate with the biggest consulting firms, with the biggest banks, etc. But before we will let students go there, maybe we can try and really work with them on building our research and development cohorts there. And it's working, Polytechnic in Wrocław have very good department in innovation and AI technology. But it's not like the R&D is present in every university at every level. So maybe both the points.
So higher education, research and development. And hopefully
more funding.
More funding through VCs. All right. Well, I would love to turn away for a little from Poland to our friends in the south. Romania is no Poland yet, but what are the kind of economic policies that you think Romania implemented over the last 10, 15 years that would be worthwhile to copy in the region in order to boost economic growth, in order to boost competitiveness? So best examples from Romania. Why will you guys be great?
So I'm not going to steal the thunder from Latchezar on taxes, because Bulgaria was the model that we took the example from. But I think the Romanian tax system is better than many, because not because of the low taxes, but because we recognized, for instance, that contributions on the salary are all paid by the employee. So in something that is radically different from most other places in the European Union, the employer does not pay the contributions. We recognize that, it comes out of the work of the employee. So the gross salary includes all the contributions, and the employee sees them on the payslip. They are paid for by the employee in declarative form, not just in practice, which is the way things work in other places. I think this is something that was very useful to increase fiscal responsibility, to basically make people more aware of how much money the government is taking from them from their work. And definitely, I hope this is something we will see implemented in Western European countries in the hopefully near future, although, it seems a bit unlikely. Besides this, I think two areas in which Romania has done well are telecom sector regulation, which was nearly inexistent in the 90s, and this has helped a lot of development in the telecom sector. It helped us be at one point the country in the world with the fastest internet. It's no longer the case, but we are still very much at the top, so it does not hinder business development in any way. And it was interesting that we managed to pass to a regulated system without disturbing the good things that we had too much. So that's one other very important thing. And the third that I would give as an example is related to the healthcare sector. Not by competence, so not because our politicians were wise, by accident. We came up with a system that delivers good results. So we have an easy way to open a private clinic or a private hospital. So there are many private sector alternatives to the public sector. The public sector used to be very, very bad. It's less bad now. I wouldn't say good, but less bad. But this meant that we had two possibilities. People could go shop for the option that fit them best. So, if you had money, you'd go to the private sector. If you didn't, then you would go into the public clinics and, get some kind of healthcare there. Correlated with the fact that university independence is very high in Romania, this led to something that I think is really interesting, because Romania is the country with the second largest number of medical school graduates per 100,000 people. So we're talking about 26 medical graduates per 100,000, only exceeded by Latvia with about 27. But of course, Romania has a larger population, and because of this, because of the many hospitals and clinics and opportunities to get training, and because the universities were allowed to train as many doctors as they wanted, Romania is now one of the primary suppliers of doctors for the EU. There are many, many Romanian doctors that are trained, not Romanian doctors, but doctors that are trained in Romania, because they're not necessarily Romanian, who then go and work in other European countries. And medical education in Romania isn't good because the state is doing a good job. It's good because there are many opportunities to get training, to get practical training in all of the public and private hospitals that we have in the country. So again, by chance, not because we were smart or wise, but because the politicians didn't figure out where to go and regulate and get in the way of things fast enough. We ended up having something that is probably a system we should try to replicate in other EU countries as well.
Well, I'm not going to wait for Belgian politicians to display how much they're taxing their citizens, because it's going to be a shock to many. But talking about taxes, I would love to turn to Latchezar and talk about some of the Bulgarian experiences. What are the policies, specifically economic policies, that you think Bulgaria got right and would be worthwhile for other Central Eastern European countries to copy?
Thank you. Well, I'll be short, and we can discuss for hours what went wrong. But one thing that I particularly want to mention here is that I believe that in Central and Eastern Europe, we are brave to try new things, to experiment. We had to, because at the end of communism, everything was falling apart, so the system was not sustainable any longer. So you needed to be brave to completely change, reshape things, reestablish things. So culturally, I think, socially, politically, I think that people accepted that big things should change and big new things should come to replace old things. And this can also be put into this into the phraseology of this Mario Draghi report on disruptive technologies and huge changes and huge leaps in the development process that you actually need to change, not just keep the things as they were. And going back to the tax, I think that also Christian mentioned, we had 10% income tax, 10% corporate tax for 16 years now, 17 even. We changed governments plenty of times during this period, left, right, populist, complex coalition of strange and bizarre parties. But if there is a relatively high consensus among anyone, is don't touch this system. I mean, you can maybe change small things here and there, but this system having 10% flat tax for everyone, so broad tax base, but with low tax rate, let's keep it. And at the same time, Bulgaria at some point, I think in this second quarter of this year, had the lowest public debt to GDP ratio in the European Union. So you can lower tax rates and still have public finances in good shape with lower deficits or even surpluses. So we have surpluses in 9 out of the last 20 years. So how? And this is with the great financial crisis and with COVID. So almost half of the time we ran surpluses with low tax rates. So but the biggest achievement, I think, is that you build trust and you build support for it to last, because many countries, in many politicians, they lower taxes, offer some tax cuts, and then in 2 years they reverse them, which is a complete shock to the business planning and business strategy. So we can talk more later.
I would gladly take my 10% tax rates in London. So it's wishful thinking, but maybe some Western European countries will listen. Let's imagine a world where all these best practices get implemented across the region. Poland will catch up with the EU GDP per capita average maybe in 15 years. Bulgaria, Romania, maybe in 20, 25 years. So let's imagine Central and Eastern Europe is economically there. What happens on the political side? So if you look at yesterday's meeting about the future of Ukraine, for example, we had the British Prime Minister, we had the French President, we had the American President, and we had the German Chancellor discussing the future of Eastern Europe. No Poland, no Baltics, no one from Eastern Europe. How do we change that, Marcin? You're a former politician. Is it really a mentality change that's required in Eastern Europe? Is it really people coming to Eastern Europe and realizing, oh man, Warsaw is a more developed city than Manchester? What is required in order to translate the economic power of Central Eastern Europe into political one within the EU?
Bardzo dobre pytanie.
That's a very good question, because I believe that when it comes to external policy, Europe is a very weak partner as EU. Because unanimity is required. And before this full-scale aggression on Ukraine, Hungary over 15 times challenged the decisions of the European Council in different issues. Well, defense sanctions on Russia after 2014, a human rights resolution for Hong Kong. Well, so we are having a continuous veto of Hungary diluting economic sanctions for Russia, be it state or individual financial support or military support to Ukraine. So possibilities for the EU to act in foreign and security policy, common foreign and security policy, they are enshrined there, but they call for unanimity. That's why the European Union cannot be a partner for the United States and Ukraine, and I think that's bad. This is my view. I'm not speaking on behalf of the government, because our government so far is contemplating how to position itself vis-a-vis the amendments to the treaty, because this chapter on common foreign and security policy or defense policy should shift from unanimity to qualified majority voting, well, anyway, it's double voting, because the number of countries count and the population counts. So because we should feel safe that nothing will be forced out on, let's say, Poland, but we could eliminate such vetoes like that of Hungary or Slovakia, and do much more for Ukraine, impose stronger sanctions on Russia, and to represent a more uniform or homogeneous political line vis-a-vis the United States. Unfortunately, well, the government so far is somehow afraid of these treaty amendments. Well, they somehow subdued to this law and justice narrative that this is the end of sovereignty, the idea of a country where there are poles, but which is governed from Brussels or Berlin, which is absurd, of course, because at the level of foreign policy, there will be issues that will be of interest to us, but where we want to have our own foreign policy, we'll still have it, but the EU can foster help to aid to Ukraine, and decisions will still be taken by our government in cooperation with other governments. It will still be a partner and decision maker, well, or co-decision maker. So the Polish statehood will not cease to exist, but we get a leverage because there will be the EU imposing sanctions, offering aid to Ukraine, taking stances vis-a-vis the United States, even if there are peace talks in the future. I think this is really highly doubtful whether within the European Union we could work out a uniform position. Because and then Russia would say, well, we'd like to negotiate with France or Germany. We need to have our common position, but not diluted by, be it Hungary or Slovakia, which are on the side of Putin.
So I support this kind of treaty change. And also it's in the interest of Poland to provide common military, 28th military, in addition to 27 national militaries, an army that would be subjected to European command. Now, Poland contributes 5% of EU budget. Who the army would be used for to deter Russia. So if other countries, major countries, contributed as well, it would be very useful to have such an army. It doesn't mean that we would give up our own military, but it would be a 28th one, could be deployed in Latvia or Poland to deter Russia. But unfortunately, the Polish government is reluctant to accept treaty changes. It has been put off perhaps by the law and justice narrative, which I believe to be harmful. So in the long term, Poland could be strengthened, not in the short term. We have not been invited, but in the long term it would improve the functioning of the EU.
Change is also a tricky issue because you're absolutely right on foreign policy and military matters. If we're united in the 27, our impact is significantly more serious, not just vis-a-vis Russia, but also vis-a-vis our allies, United States, and everyone in between, enemies and allies. Obviously, it's a bit more tricky when it comes to some of the economic questions, right? So let's imagine a world where Poland and the Baltics are the only ones who like to stick to some pro-market policies like low corporate tax rates, and it's centralized by the European Union. And if we removed veto powers, then maybe we will on the losing side of some of these economic changes. But given how many economists we have on the panel, I would like to turn to Latchezar or to Christian and ask, what are the kind of EU level positive impact that Bulgaria or that Romania can have within the current structure of the European Union? So what are the things that your countries, with the background that you have, low tax rates in Bulgaria, IT economic competitiveness in Romania, what are the things that your government should really be pushing on an EU level in order to make not just your countries more prosperous, but also the rest of the single market?
Can I go? So, first of all, to frame a few things for those in the audience who don't know these things, probably most people, Romania is one of the most pro-European countries in the EU. 83% of Romanians think it's great we are members of the EU. The other 17% don't necessarily think it's not great. They just didn't say. So we understand, comparing the current state of things with communism, we understand that, being a part of the single market is a very important thing, that it is a source of great opportunity that has helped our country develop at a rate which, by the way, would make us reach the average way sooner than 20 years.
What's a year?
So it would be 12 years if we were able to maintain the previous rate of approach. I don't think we will.
With the German economy and the French economy slowing down, you may get there even sooner.
Exactly. So, it's not just us. It's also how poorly the others fare. Unfortunately. Yeah. But to get to the question, I think it's also very important to note that the reason Romanians are actually becoming more Eurosceptic than they used to be is due to a lot of bad policies coming from Brussels. So there are many things, like tax harmonization, which are impacting the opinion that Romanians have on the EU project as a whole. So don't get me wrong, we still love the single market. We appreciate all the benefits of the free movement that the country gets. If anything, another main reason why Romanians are upset at the EU is that us and the Bulgarians were not allowed into Schengen, not properly anyway. So that's another point of contention. But a lot of the policies that are steering away from a free market and from competition are at the core of why the Romanian, let's call them far-right parties, the populists, are rising in importance, and their dialogue, which is against the EU, is also rising in volume, because the EU is doing some things that it shouldn't be doing. We should be prioritizing competition, and we should be competing to offer the best possible systems and the best possible offer to the business sector, so that Romanian businesses, venture capital funds, and other entities of the sort can do as well as they can in the best place they can find within the EU. So I think if Romanians understood that we have a voice in the EU, which is something that we don't right now. We think that, the EU is a parent to be obeyed. They tell us what to do and we just do it. I've heard a lot of people here at the conference talking about how Poland should express itself at the level of the EU. We don't even have this concept being discussed in public policy in Romania. We don't get that, as a member state, you're supposed to do more than just ingest what they feed you from Brussels. So definitely, I think we should be more vocal about the improvements in tax systems, the improvements in regulation that we have been able to do in Romania, which would help other countries in the EU and the EU in general become more competitive, since everybody loves talking about this these days. But, as far as Romania is concerned, unfortunately, I can't bring the news that we are going to be the heralds of the new competitive EU, because we in Romania just don't get it, that we are supposed to also tell other people what we think.
Is that similar in Bulgaria? Is that a missing from the conversation? I mean, it's not just a new member state thing, because if I talk to some Swedish or Danish politicians, they have often the same mentality that now the Brits are gone from the UK, now no one is screaming no, 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 and we're just listening to all the French ideas about more centralization and all the Italian ideas about more indebtedness. So it's not necessarily just a new member state thing. How's the situation in Bulgaria?
Pretty similar, of course. And Bulgaria is also 3 times smaller than Romania in terms of population. So we're even smaller. But let me talk about the positive or the optimistic story. I think in Central Eastern Europe, most people and most politicians, not everyone, and businesses, of course, they understand the value and the benefit, the advantage of an open, free market, because there is no other option for us, probably with the exception of Poland, which is a relatively big economy. But for most of the others, it's absurd to think of within national borders. 90% of your chances are to go global, to be globally competitive. Now in Bulgaria, the biggest discussion in business news is about the recession in Germany. Why? Because everyone works for the German industry. So you supply German manufacturing with things in our manufacturing. So you have to be interested in what is going on around you. So this is overall support for trade openness, going global, and again, try new things. Christian discussed let's say the IT or digital services and companies. It's thriving in Bulgaria. In the last 10 years, we added 65,000 jobs in IT services. And also with the venture capital, of course, most of them want to grow by going to the United States, unfortunately not staying in Europe. But still you have entrepreneurs who start their business, grow, then they look around and want to be globally competitive. And I believe that this culture is something that some of the bigger and, let's say, wealthier economies, but stagnant economies, might learn from. And that's it. And also, of course, we have much cheaper welfare systems, and still we keep low unemployment and some other important benefits. For example, Bulgaria, I think, is the country with the longest paid maternity leave. So 410 days, which is 1 year plus 45 days of full pay. So, and still you have low taxes and low public debt. So these are lessons that can be replicated if someone tries to listen. So my point is, if you're a French person or German, you don't need to go to some place in Asia or Latin America to explore how you can have a smaller government and lower taxes or cheaper welfare state. You can go to Eastern Europe and see how healthcare works, how social benefits work, etc.
Totally agree, but this is almost like a pride thing for many Western Europeans. If you tell to a French person that maybe France should be emulating Poland or Bulgaria, I would like to see their reaction. But you're absolutely right.
I just want to quickly flex on the fact that we have 2 full years of paid maternity leave.
Full percentage paid? Or?
It's like 85% of the last salary. So, but it's like full pay, there's nothing stopping you from taking 24 months.
Talking very specifically about competitiveness on an EU level, Zofia, obviously with your business background, I would be very curious to see, after the Draghi report, what are the things that the EU should be implementing essentially tomorrow in order to increase its competitiveness? What are the things that we can copy from the United States, from fast-growing Asian economies, or from already existing policies within EU member states?
I think one of the most interesting issue would be regulations. Unfortunately or fortunately, the case is in the US we can scale because the regulations are different on like state level, but the federal is one and state do not differ so much. So having business that will bring you millions of revenues, it's not that hard in US, but building that in Europe when you have different languages, different regulation system, different approach to politics, it is a struggle, and I would say this might be the point to start that maybe let's fix that from one side. On the other hand, there was a guy, Michael Porter, who long time ago discovered what actually builds competitiveness of nations. And if you would look at what we want to build in Europe, especially I think it's a sentiment in Poland that, we have electric cars. So right now the Poland, I think in 2018 started a discussion, but we need our own electric car. But it's not innovative. It is innovative in a point. When we would start it maybe 15 years ago when it was not so popular, maybe we would gain an advantage from others. But doing this now after when there's a lot of automobile sectors that are already building on that, of course I'm not tackling on China issues and the subsidies for the EVs, but the case is that we need to really tackle on the industries that are not well discovered.
So what is our competitive edge? What are the sectors where you think European countries can be a bit more ambitious about?
I would say ICT, so this is information and communication technology. We really have good specialists, especially in Poland. We do have them, but the case is that if you want to, as I said, maybe it's also connected, from my perspective, it's connected to raising funds. It's harder to raise funds in Poland than in Germany. Like deep tech in Germany is at least existing and having money. In Poland, it's very hard to gain the money because it's a lower amount of it. But the specialists are here. Sometimes they're going out, sometimes not. But I think there is one sector that maybe would not come up to my idea before our conversation, but I think about agriculture. Agriculture sector in Poland is not as well developed as in other states. I don't want to say it's the best in every other sector, but if you want to say that average, I would say agriculture farm is, I wouldn't say it's like 11, it's 11 hectares, which is, if you have, this is your average agriculture agriculture farm, it's not even able to make money from it. But we have really a good companies that are, having thousands of acres. But the way we are subsidizing, for example, this sector is making it less competitive because it's worth it to keep the actually land you have to maybe rent it, but in a black market. So I would say maybe that might be interesting also from biotechnical point of view. But yeah, that's right.
Reforming the common agricultural policy is not an easy endeavor, but I hope that with Ukraine potentially joining the European Union, that will be a necessary thing to do. Marcin.
Chciałem akurat ten temat skomentować, tego włączenia się Ukrainy do Unii Europejskiej.
I'd like to comment on joining of Ukraine to European Union. We know that Ukraine has a huge stock of Chernozems and long season of vegetation, and their farms, thousands of hectares large, and indeed using even better agricultural techniques, you can double the crops. So I've heard about ideas that once Ukraine joins the EU, we would need to spend more money on the common agricultural policy. But from the economic point of view, it's exactly the opposite. If the Ukraine right now is able to effectively compete with a significant portion of the European agriculture without any subsidies, and if Ukraine is more competitive right now, providing cheaper products, which is obviously beneficial for consumers. Nobody is saying that. So hundreds of millions of consumers are benefiting from it. So everybody, saves a few, let's say a few dollars, a few euros. It's not a major political force, but Ukrainians are a force. So obviously, it's in our interest as the EU for Ukraine to join us, because then we'll be able to radically decrease subsidies. But of course, the real problem is that you will need to compensate for the farmers. We need to have a transitioning period to make sure they have decent living standards without producing produce. Now, perhaps if reforestation would be a solution. I'm not sure if you realize that Europe is so deforested mainly due to agriculture. So I think that the benefits of Ukrainian agriculture would be very substantial for our consumers and the food safety of Europe. But I'm not sure if the thinking of politicians and think tanks goes in this direction, as they're linked to the agricultural lobby, or they are not able to think out of the box and realize that it won't be necessary to provide extra subsidies.
The common agricultural policies reform is almost mission impossible, and hearing such voices from Poland especially, it's very reassuring. And there are very positive international examples. I mean, if you take the example of New Zealand that did exactly this sort of reform back in the 70s, now New Zealand's economic or agricultural sector is doing extremely well, and it's one of the most competitive out in the world. So Poland, France, Italy, Ukraine could easily be as competitive if we manage to reform the common agricultural policy. But I will leave that topic aside for a little. And unlike the leaders of the 4 countries who met yesterday, we are keen to include diverse voices in this conversation. We have about 10 minutes left of the conversation, so I would like to throw it out for the audience for any questions.
Good afternoon. Thank you for a very interesting discussion. My name is Filip Lachowski. I'm keen to get a feel on whether Central and Eastern European countries, or at least our distinguished panelists, can fully align on the main priorities for reshaping the European Union from CE. So let's maybe run a small test. Let's hypothetically, let's assume that Central and Eastern European countries could change one thing in the EU if they agree on what it needs to be. I'd be keen to understand what it should be.
I like that thought exercise. So where should we start? Christian, Romania, what's the one thing that you would change tomorrow when it comes to EU regulations or EU policies?
It's a very tough one, but my pet project is the pension system. One of the biggest issues that we have in Romania and in most of Europe is the public pension system. the inherent debt of the pension system in Romania is estimated to be about 380% of GDP. So if we were to put back the money that was squandered by the public pension system, we'd have to work for 4 years and do nothing else just to put the money back.
Start working today.
Exactly. So I think, if we were to do something, it would be to really make a system of free movement of capital, which would enable private pension systems to more quickly take over the role of the public pension systems, which are going to fail us in a tragic way sometime very soon.
Pension reform. Marcin, what would yours be?
Proszę Państwa,
I think you will not be surprised, because to me the major issue is for Ukraine to win the war with Russia. To our safety and security, this is of primary importance. How do I see this victory? It doesn't mean that they have to get back all of its territory, because we know that growth may take place in different territories, but stopping this war, perhaps the territories occupied by Russia will be considered as occupied by Ukraine and as annexed by Russia. But there will be peace, and in terms of peace, Ukraine could join the EU and NATO. And by that, we would ensure them, we would give them some safety and security and some growth perspective. If Ukraine loses, it means that the West is losing the war, and this will not be good news to us.
Encouragement, essentially, both of the EU and NATO. Okay. Sofia?
I think if I were to touch the topic of agriculture, maybe actually getting into this topic, because I think it's about 1/3 cost of the EU budget. So even small changes that would actually help the competitiveness of agriculture sectors in CE, I would appreciate them. So.
Small changes or just getting rid of it all? How ambitious should we be? You're not.
I know it's a difficult topic, so I believe that we can start small and then develop. But at the end, a huge reform is needed. So
you're more diplomatic than I am. All right, Latchezar, what would your one policy be?
Just erase the common agricultural policy for me. But apart from that, completing, let's say, the single market in services, that's my priority. So this is crucial especially for smaller economies.
So what does that practically mean? Give us the example of.
Practically all the regulated professions, all the regulated services, you need to license in every jurisdiction. It's absurd. I mean, you start a company in Bulgaria, then you want to open doing the same service in Romania, new licensing, then you go to Lithuania, new licensing, new regulations, and people who work there, they had to apply for different professional permit and stuff like that. All this should go.
I like that. Next question, indeed. The gentleman in the back, and then the gentleman on the left-hand side.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for interesting discussion, but I have a question because you said about joining Ukraine to the EU, and one thing, should we put aside the problem of corruption in Ukraine, because we know that there is a little bit problem in Ukraine with that, and what is your point of view on this problem? And other question, what is your point of view according to Draghi report that, for example, in Poland we have a huge public sector. The last government stopped privatization, and now the government of the coalition parties continues that policy, and we don't hear about privatization plans, and we have huge social spendings. And because yesterday there was a discussion about AI, and there is the biggest problem is financing AI, and we hear from the Ministry of the European Funds that she put on the top the social buildings, social apartments. I don't know why, because everybody can buy by itself.
So it's Polish privatization and Ukrainian reforms, especially related to corruption. We will take a second question as well, and the gentleman on the left.
I've been thinking about the German leadership in the European Union, how much time more it's going to last. I mean, what are the predictions? Because economically, Germany stopped to develop so rapidly than before, and especially German GDP, you also mentioned that. And in 20 years, our reality in the EU economically is going to change because of the Eastern Bloc coming to power more than now. And is Germany going to step aside, or what are the predictions? Or in 20 years, the reality is still going to be the same as today?
Perfect. Thank you so much. Marcin, would you like to address Polish privatization, and then Christian and Latchezar can comment on the Ukrainian situation as well?
Ja mogę skomentować tą korupcję.
I can comment on this corruption in Ukraine, because really there is quite a lot of corruption on the one hand, but on the other hand, after the revolution in 2014, they took steps to counteract corruption. There is a special prosecutor, a special court, a business ombudsman, and so on and so forth. There are institutions which perhaps don't work very well. Right now there is some kind of wartime corruption. Well, corruption is still there, but in my opinion, this, Zelensky, the current government is much less corrupted than at the time of Yanukovych, because at that time these structures were completely corrupted from top to the bottom. Well, you had to pay bribes to everyone at each level. Well, of course, there may be a minister or deputy minister who is caught red-handed, but they are dismissed immediately. And corruption, fortunately, is put at the spot of interest of different organizations, EU organizations working in Ukraine. So they are really following it very closely, and they are working also on the transparency of recruiting people to these organizations. So there is a kind of common effort of the government and the EU institutions. Probably we could do more and better. I agree that this is a problem, that this is an issue, but they are trying to resolve it.
Eventually, we just have to continue the work quite a bit. Christian, would you like to comment on Germany's economic influence within the EU and how that interlinks with Central Eastern European countries taking more of a leading role?
So first, a very quick comment about the corruption in Ukraine thing. So for Romania, it was very useful to be part of the EU because the EU forced us to implement anti-corruption measures, and it helped us establish an anti-corruption division, which gave us the current head prosecutor of the EU, Laura Kövesi, this Romanian lady with no sense of humor and no patience for corrupt politicians, is a very good instrument that could help Ukraine reform things. And very quickly on the German question, I don't think Germany is exhibiting much leadership in the EU as of late. I think it's not, you don't just have to be the largest economy. I think you also need other things that after Chancellor Merkel stepped down, Germany doesn't seem to have the edge that it needs to actually be a leader of the EU. So I don't think it's going to take 20 years.
Great. Latchezar?
Just a comment on economics. Once Eastern Europe approaches, let's say, 85-90% of EU average in terms of GDP per capita, then the only way to continue the fast growth would be to decouple their economies from, let's say, Germany, France, Italy, if they continue to stagnate. Otherwise, it's mathematically impossible. If your manufacturing, if your services are closely linked to German ones, and then Germany stagnates, then how can you grow? I mean, you can grow from going from 40% to 80%, but then you stall. So my idea of continuing fast growth for Eastern Europe is that we decouple from Germany. And, well, yeah, I know. 2 weeks ago, I was in a venture capital conference. All the guys there, successful, like multi-million-dollar companies, Bulgarian owned. They operate Canada, Australia, US. They don't care about what happens in Italy or Germany.
Sure. Fantastic. I'm afraid we have run out of time, but I hope that in 5 years' time, we will reconvene here and talk about the influential changes that Poland and the rest of Central Eastern European countries contributed to the benefit of the European Union. But for now, I would like to thank you for your attention. Also mention that we have an upcoming panel where we're going to be handing out some free drinks and celebratory welcome drinks at 6 o'clock in the Sky room. So if you're up for a little bit of a farewell party, we would love for you to join there. But for now, Zofia, gentlemen, thank you so much for the discussion, and thank you so much for attending.